Right here.
Gibson.
And I'm Serena Mazzanani. We are pleased to be your master and mistress of ceremonies for this exciting event as we inaugurate Governor-elect Edward Jerome Baza Calvo and Lieutenant Governor-elect Raymond S. Tenorio as Governor and Lieutenant Governor.
You may applaud now from your seats. How about it? Welcome to the show. Just a couple of notes. The music that you've been listening to has been provided by the Guam Combined Band, consisting of the 721st Army Band and the Guam Territorial Band, both under the direction and command of Warrant Officer 1 Maxwell Curio Jr. And a bow to the audience, sir. Thank you so much. We thank the Guam National Guard, the government of Guam, their families, employers, and school administrators for allowing these musicians to be here today. And through the next half hour or so, we'll take you through some of the bits and pieces of the ceremony that you were about to witness here. I hope you brought your cameras with you. In the meantime, go ahead and get yourselves comfortable. Say hello to friends and family. We're looking at an on-time start about 4:25, 4:30 here this afternoon. So in the meantime, I'm going to send it back to the maestro and our music on stage.
Happy New Year, brother.
Same thing as me. Big tip. An hour, 5 minutes is my max time.
Absolutely stirring music, ladies and gentlemen. A round of applause for the Guam Combined Band featuring the 721st Army Band and the Guam Territorial Band. Max Ranquillo holding the baton and the maestro here this afternoon. We'll ask him to play at least another tune before we get everything started. But before we allow them to do that, just a couple of notes here. We couldn't have picked a better day to conduct this inaugural service, and we are pleased that everyone is here. We recognize that some of you might be a little bit warm, a little bit thirsty, and for your convenience, there are a number of coolers spread out throughout the Plaza de España. Please avail yourself of any of the cold water refreshments that we've got in there. Chief Justice of the Costa State Government, Alixa. Senator, Federated States of Micronesia, Peter Christian. The Governor and First Lady of Pohnpei, Mr. and Mrs. John Asa. Mr. and Mrs. Benigno Fidel, the Governor of Saipan. Senator from the Federated States of Micronesia, Nosis Halbert. President of the Pacific Islands Legislature in Palau, Reblud Kosele. Vice Mayor of the Philippines, Anthony Marasigan. The President of the Pacific Islands Development Bank, Aaron Palik. Mr. and Mrs. Nelson Pele, Pohnpei State Government. Federated States of Micronesia's Congressional Vice Speaker, Federico Primo. Also from the Philippines, Strike Revilla. From the FSM National Government, Loren Roberts. The Governor of Chuuk State and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Wesley Simina. The President of Palau, Johnson Toribio. From the Atuna Foundation, Walden Wellbacher. Representing the Secretary General, PACOM, Amina Yavoli.
From the military and federal government, please welcome Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Insular Affairs, Mr. Anthony Marion Babalta. From Congresswoman Madeline Berdalio's office, Mr. Joaquin Perez and Andrew Tenorio. The Commander of Joint Region Marianas, Mr. and Mrs. Rear Admiral Paul Bouchon. The Commander of the 36th Wing, Mr. and Mrs. Brigadier General John Doucette. Commanding General Marine Forces Pacific, Mr. and Mrs. Lieutenant General Dwayne Thiessen. The Director of Marine Pacific Forces, Mr. and Mrs. Colonel Robert Lloyd. The Executive Director of Marine Forces Pacific, Mr. and Mrs. Craig Weldon. The former Adjutant General of the National Guard, Mr. and Mrs. Major General Donald Goldhorn. The Adjutant General of the National Guard, Mr. and Mrs. Major General Benny Paulino. The Commanding Officer of Naval Base Guam, Mr. and Mrs. Captain Richard Wood. U.S. Coast Guard Sector Guam Commander, Mr. and Mrs. Yuri Graves. The Commanding Chief of the 36th Wing at Anderson Air Force Base, Chief Master Sergeant Margarita Overton. Chief of Anderson Development Office, Mr. and Mrs. Steve Woborski. The Commanding Officer of NAVFAC Marianas, Captain Peter Lynch. And Sergeant Major of the Marine Forces Pacific, James Futrell.
A number of other dignitaries have joined us as well. It's a pleasure to acknowledge the participation and the attendance of the members of the 31st Guam Legislature earlier today enjoying their inaugural ceremony, and it would be appropriate at this time to give them and all of our visiting dignitaries and guests a round of applause. We recognize that there's no way that that list could ever be complete, so please be assured if we didn't mention you or your organization, trust that we are thankful that you are here to participate in this auspicious event. Also like to acknowledge the participation and attendance of members of the Mayor's Council and the Mayors of Guam. Up and under the music, our combined band here today, we have an opportunity to acknowledge the participation of many other members of our community here. Senators, the 31st Guam Legislature, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Adda, Senator Tomas Adda and his wife, Senator Frank Loss Jr. and his wife Tilly, Senator B.J. Cruz, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Judy Guthers, Senator Sam Levine, Tina Rose, Mooney Barnes, and Jake, Senator and Mrs. Adolfo Palacios, Senator Ben Pangilinan, Senator and Mrs. Roy Respicio, Senator and Mrs. Dennis Rodriguez, Senator Monaso Mataran and husband Phil, Speaker Judith Wongpat and Oline Yamashita, Senator and Dr. Oline Yamashita.
I'd also like to recognize some of our mayors and vice mayors that are here. Santa Rita Mayor, Mr. and Mrs. Dale Alvarez, the Vice Mayor of Tenorio, Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Beneventi, Tamuning Mayor, Mr. and Mrs. Francisco Gloss, the Vice Mayor of Barrigada, June Gloss, Manila Mayor, Mr.